the plots of Shakespeare plays are really solid, that the
Yeah.
actual story of what happens really still holds up. Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back to No Script, an unscripted conversation about theater's best scripts. I'm Jacob Mann Christensen.
And I am Jackson Nikolai. Here we are. We're back. We promised we'd be back. And here, lo and behold, we returned. We're excited to be back.
We're back after our between season break. We do that twice a year, and we wrapped up season 9 in December of 2022, and now it is 2023, and we are here for an exciting moment in No Script, the first episode of season 10.
Yeah, we made 10 seasons of talking about theater's best scripts. It's been super great. Super excited to be kicking off this. You know, what it feels like 10 is a significant number, right? You just hit the double digits or something like that. Decades are measured in 10 years, etc. We haven't been doing it for a decade, but we have been doing it for 10 seasons. And we're just stoked that we get to have these conversations with each other and with all of you out there in podcast lands for all of these seasons.
Yes, absolutely. 10 seasons, 5 years ago. This semester, we began No Script, and we've had weekly conversations about some of the great scripts in theater since then, and that has been an amazing privilege. This season, we'll have some things that are the same. We're doing a themed month. We're doing a special guest episode. We have some things that are different. Most notably, you've just enjoyed our new theme music.
Ooh, yep. Excited to bring that out. We've been glad to use the music that we have been able to find and credit for the podcast for all of these seasons. And this season, it was just time to kind of write something of our own. So I threw something together. Hope you enjoyed it. It's gonna be our for sure our tunes for this season, and excited to kind of have that as an offering for all of you.
Yeah, oh, for sure. We've been using the royalty-free music thing for all 9 of our previous seasons, and there was a change in there. We went from one royalty-free song to another royalty-free song, but there came a point where we were like, that was probably the last commercial I need to hear on TV with our music in the background, because they also were using royalty-free music. Legitimately, that has happened. So, you know what? It was time for the music to be ours, to come from the podcast, to be for the podcast, to be unique to No Script. And so we're so excited by the music Jackson has written. His whole family is musical and talented, and now that is part of this story as well.
Yeah, it's been a blast. Excited to get to share it with all of you, and excited to kind of launch into. We continuously have like great new scripts that we're talking about. And this play, the play that we're kicking off the year with is no exception. The watermark on my copy of the script is June 2022. So this is
that's the draft we're reading. Yeah.
It's certainly fresh, and I'm excited to get to talk about it.
Yeah, we are continuing the tradition that we try to uphold as best we can. It's not always in our power, but we try as much as we can to begin our seasons with a recent Pulitzer. You'll notice that we've skipped one. We are still trying to get a hold of a script for The Hot Wing King by Katori Hall. If you or someone you know has access to a draft of that script, we would love to be able to feature it as the first episode of next season. But this season, we are discussing what is right now the most recent Pulitzer Prize winner, Fat Ham by James Ijames. And it is, there's something kind of interesting and special, I think, about doing this script as the first episode of such a monumental season for No Script. And then we're in our season 10, this sort of big milestone moment for the podcast. And Fat Ham is a contemporary adaptation of Hamlet, perhaps the most famous play of all time.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's one of those plays that, like, if you go to try to adapt or recontextualize or give a new anachronistic approach to it, it's like, okay, so everyone pretty much knows a lot about this one. They're going to be watching all the changes. And it's just super exciting to get to read this play, to get to kind of see some of its story. I'm not going to steal the context away from Jacob, but it's got a cool context about how it came about in the moment of time that it came about, and how it's kind of continued to have performances and stuff. So it's an exciting script, both because of the nature of its homage or conversation with Shakespeare's Hamlet, and also because of the way that it has existed in the world ever since its inception.
And as a little peek into the way that we think about the podcast and the programming and such like that, we have, of course, talked about doing Hamlet on the podcast. It's like, well, it's the most famous play. We're a theater play podcast. Perhaps we should discuss it. But we always come back around to this feeling of like, is there anything to say about it, really, in terms of our conversation about it on the podcast? Everybody's talked about Hamlet across, centuries now. But the ability to sort of access some of what Hamlet is through a new lens, this incredible twist on it. We'll talk about that when we get to the synopsis and in our conversation, the way James Ijames has sort of twisted almost the kind of core nature of what Hamlet is into something fresh and relevant and very funny. It's nice to be able to do Hamlet in some capacity through this script, Fat Ham.
Yes. Yes, I'm excited to get to jump into the conversation about it. Lots of great things to unpack and explore in it. And before we jump into it, though, we wanted to take a second and, as we always do, thank all of our patrons over on patreon.com/noscriptpodcast for being a part of this show. It's still, it's not necessarily New Yearish now, as we are approaching the end or the start of February here. But it's still the start of the new season, and a practice of gratefulness is a great thing to do in the new season / new year. And so we wanted to say thank you to all of our patrons. You make this show possible. We love getting to have these conversations, all these conversations about theater's best scripts, about new scripts, about old scripts, about the ways that those two things interact, as we're going to talk about today. And you all at patreon.com/noscriptpodcast make that possible. If you're enjoying the show, if you have been a longtime listener and are excited that we're back again and are looking for a way to get involved in the show more this year, or if you're a first-time listener and are just liking the energy so far and want to kind of join in the party over at patreon.com/noscriptpodcast, it's a great way to do it. Number of different tiers of membership, the lowest one being just $1, $12 over the course of a year. And other tiers as well with different benefits, but you get things like access to patron-only posts, credit in some episodes at the playwright level of patronship, and kind of heads up on some of the scripts that we're doing throughout the season. So if you're looking for a way to help out the show, be a part of the No Script community in a really impactful way to help the show keep going on, patreon.com/noscriptpodcast is a great way to do it. Thank you to all of our patrons, and we will see you over there.
Yeah, our 10 seasons could not be 10 seasons without the patrons on patreon.com/noscriptpodcast. Y'all are awesome. Thanks so much. And now back to the script.
Here we go.
Hey, okay, so James Ijames, new playwright to the podcast, always fun to do, and great to have for the first episode of a new season as well. James Ijames is a really cool individual who does a lot of stuff that has this sort of unique location and function within the theater community. He's out of Philadelphia, and being out of Philadelphia, he is sort of got two prongs, many prongs in the Philadelphia community, but two I just want to highlight here. First of all, he's an associate professor at Villanova University, and it's a little unclear to me whether he's still actively teaching courses there, or because of the success of Fat Ham and some of the other things he's doing, whether he's just sort of on the faculty and teaches occasionally. We know that that is true of other practicing theater artists. But he's an associate professor as part of the faculty at Villanova University. He received his BA in drama, his MFA in acting before becoming a playwright and all the other things that he does. He's an award-winning director as well. He's the co-founder of the Orbiter 3 Playwright Collective. But one of the things that I think is really special and cool about James Ijames is that he is part of this new leadership experiment for a model of leading theater companies at the Wilma Theater. The Wilma Theater is one of the nation's most renowned, most highly noted regional professional theaters. They did a lot of stuff during the pandemic in filming live productions that were really high quality and tried not to sacrifice the sort of nature of what the stage itself is, didn't try to turn them into films. A lot of people were trying to do that. The Wilma Theater did it very successfully. I think we are later in the season slated to talk about another play that they did in a similar format, but Fat Ham premiered in that way. But what I really want to say about it is that James Ijames is part of a trio of people who are all the co-artistic directors of the Wilma Theater in this new leadership model. So he and the other three co-artistic directors basically alternate years where they are the lead artistic director, and then the other, it sort of comes around in a cycle like that. So it's a very exciting new model for theater leadership. There's been this long time sort of pairing of being like a tenured theater professor with being like a tenured artistic director. There's sort of this, like, when you're an artistic director, you're in that role until you retire. But at the same time, we're rethinking the way that theater leadership works, or arts leadership in general works. And so to try this new model at one of, not just like some back alley theater, but the Wilma Theater, again, one of the nation's most renowned regional professional houses, is, I think it's impressive. I think it's fascinating. I think it's an incredibly exciting new way of looking at leadership in the arts. So I just wanted to give a shout out for that, which has nothing really to do with his playwriting. His most notable play before Fat Ham, which is the one that really blows up, of course, is a play called The Most Spectacularly Lamentable Trial of Ms. Martha Washington, which premiered in 2013 at a playwriting development sort of conference called Playpen in Philadelphia. That one had some really nice regional life. It played at Steppenwolf. But then, of course, Fat Ham has reached this whole other level, which we'll talk about in a second. Ijames has won many, many awards, including for acting and directing, which I'm not going to highlight right now. He's won the F. Otto Haas Award for Emerging Artist, which was in 2011. That's a Philadelphia local award for an emerging artist in that scene. He really, really sort of belongs as part of that community and really speaks to it and works in it. He won a 2015 Pew Fellowship for playwriting. He was the 2015 winner of the Terrence McNally New Play Award for his play White. He was the 2017 recipient of the Whitting Award. And then he is the 2020 and 2022. He's one of the prize winners of the Steinberg Prize, which is a sort of collective of playwrights each year that is awarded this, basically it's a grant or a fellowship for early to mid-career playwrights. And then, of course, he won the Pulitzer Prize for drama, that sort of no-name award that no one's ever heard of.
Right.
James Ijames has had plays produced by Flashpoint Theater Company, Theater Horizon, the National Black Theater, the Public Theater, the Hudson Valley Shakespeare Theater, Steppenwolf, Timeline Theater, which is a great little theater in Chicago. He's done a bunch of the new play development programs that you may have heard of out there, like Clubbed Thumb, like The Lark, like Playwrights Horizons. Done all that really incredible stuff that he's been able to work on. I've been able to check out and grab a couple of his other scripts just as a matter of interest. Fat Ham, as his kind of pinnacle work right now, that Pulitzer Prize-winning play that is about to go on Broadway, hint, hint, for what's about to come, premiered in 2021, right? So this is during the pandemic, at the Wilma Theater in a kind of special filmed production event. James Ijames talks about basically putting up the cast and crew in a bubble in Philadelphia, and then they would work on filming the scenes. It's a really cool piece. It's filmed in a really cool style where they still try to nod to the theatricality of what James Ijames is doing. And on the strength of that production, he goes on to be nominated for the Pulitzer Prize. And then as a result of that, May of 2022, so just last year in the spring, the play premiered off-Broadway at the Public Theater in New York. And now that production is transferring to Broadway as we speak. It's going to open at the American Airlines Theater here in just a few short months. So if you are a Broadway person, you have the chance to check that production out. My understanding is that it's going to be a fairly limited run just through the end of the summer. So if you are somebody who wants to go see Broadway shows, you have a chance to see Fat Ham on Broadway here in the spring and summer of 2023 if you're listening to this episode as it comes out. And that is kind of the most recent updates, because this play is quite new. It's a Pulitzer Prize winner that's getting its Broadway time in the spotlight. But also, as we've been tracking these plays that, had life either taken from them by the pandemic because they were coming into their own and then the pandemic happened, or that somehow came out of the pandemic. This is a play whose first production, the production on the strength of which it goes on to win all these awards, that came out as a filmed production during the pandemic, kind of a next step in the development and life cycle we've been tracking of how the pandemic changed playwriting and getting your plays premiered.
Yeah, the continued kind of scrappiness of theater folks in the middle of a pandemic to continue doing the work, and now it's getting its moment to kind of return to the stage. It's just an exciting project to get to kind of watch and get to talk about. As we jump into the conversation here, I'm going to quick synopsize the script as best I can, so that we're starting on a similar playing field as we engage in the conversation. If you haven't had the chance to read or see the play yet. We were chatting beforehand on this, and this is a fun one to try to synopsize. So I think what I'm going to do is broad strokes and probably some spoilery strokes, because I think there's an interesting world. We've already kind of spoiled the fact that this is very much in conversation with Hamlet, which is in the title, kind of like it's there for you to find pretty easily. But there is a world where you could walk into the theater and get maybe, I don't know, possibly a third of the way through the play. If you weren't paying attention to Hamlet when you read it in high school, possibly a third through the play, you might go, oh, it's probably something to do with Hamlet. But the whole kind of cast list right away at the top of the play kind of gives away the game. You have just a bunch of characters who I'm just paging through to get all of them on the same area here. You have Juicy, who is standing in for the Hamlet-esque character. I'll just read the character description for Juicy. Juicy is thick with 2 C's. 20 to 21, black, he's beautiful, he is lonely, he is smart, a kind of Hamlet. You have his mother, Tedra, who is kind of a Gertrude. You have Rev, who is Tedra's current husband, very much like Claudius. You have Opal, who is one of Juicy's only friends. She's 19 to 20 and a kind of Ophelia. You have Larry, a boy that is attracted to Juicy. And he is a 21 to 23, a black, a Marine trying to heal from PTSD. He has a secret, he's awkward, he's kind of a Laertes. You have Rabbi, who is Larry and Opal's mother, which is interesting because she stands as a kind of Polonius. And then you have Pap, who is the ghost of Juicy's father, and Tio, who is Juicy's cousin. He's his oldest friend, and he's kind of a Horatio. So right away from the character descriptions, we're getting the conversation with Shakespeare's Hamlet. As far as the setting of this play goes, it's a house in North Carolina, could also be Virginia or Maryland or Tennessee. It is not Mississippi or Alabama or Florida. That's a different thing altogether, is what the setting of the place says here. The time is the American South, sometime in at least when he was. I'll just read it because he phrases it quite well. The American South to me exists in a kind of liminal space between the past and the present, with an aspirational relationship to the future that is contingent to your history living in the South. All that to say, I'm writing this play from inside the second decade of the 21st century. This world aesthetically sits anywhere in the 4 to 6 decades preceding the current moment. So, contemporary.
Thank you. Thank you, James Ijames, for doing what I just cannot understand why other playwrights don't do. It's like they say the present, but it's like the present when you wrote it, man. Come on. And James Ijames is just like, I'm writing it like in this year, hereabouts. It's set in these years, hereabouts.
Yes.
Thank you. I was delighted to read that. Everybody who wants to put the present should just put that instead.
As I was reading it, I was like, oh, Jacob's going to love this one. It's perfect.
It's perfect. It's exactly what they want to achieve. They want to say the present to right now.
Yep. So yeah, sometime in the present to right now. So that's the setting for the play. And then a lot of like Hamlet-esque things happen. We're going to get into the conversation and talk about how it riffs on it super well. But I'm just going to kind of hit the beats of the play as we go. So Tio, the cousin, the Horatio-esque character, and Juicy are outside. They're setting up this reception for the wedding of Tedra and Rev. It's a barbecue reception at their house, and they're kind of setting up this kind of hodgepodge of different decorations and sorts of things. They're having conversation back and forth. Their relationship is very close. They're kind of discussing whatever Tio is watching on his phone, which is some sort of OnlyFans account that he's going. So right away, you're kind of like set into the modern moment. You know, we're using apps. We know we're using phones and all that business. However, pretty quickly, Tio sees the ghost of Pap, who is Juicy's father, and he's kind of walking through the scene. Tio notices him, and when Juicy, who has stepped inside for just a second, comes back in, Tio's like, I saw your dad. What's going on? And you have some banter between the two of them. Eventually, Tio steps away. Juicy then sees Pap, who emerges. He says that they have a pretty contentious relationship around, especially Pap's judgment of Juicy, who is definitely gender non-conforming. Later on in the play, he'll kind of reveal that he's not really interested in either men or women, and he's kind of like floating between, and he gets a lot of flack from his family throughout this play. And Pap starts that off, kind of critiquing his weight, kind of critiquing how he presents himself and all that business, but then eventually demanding that he avenge him, avenge his death. He died because he went to prison for killing a man because his breath smelled bad. And so he killed him, went to prison, and then he was then following killed in prison. Ghost of Pap claims that is a result of Rev, who has orchestrated this crime, and that now his son Juicy has to avenge him. And there's no ifs, ands, or buts. You must go out and kill Rev as a result of this. So, Juicy understandably has some resistance to that and kind of wonders whether or not he can do this sort of thing and contemplates that. But eventually the wedding reception and barbecue continues to be set up. Rev enters the scene. He's this kind of gregarious pit cook. And he comes in and he has a lot of critique of Juicy as well. Even as Tedra is in the scene and they're kind of moving around, there's quite a bit of critique of Juicy and how he shows up in the world. Their contention is pretty clearly shown. Eventually, Juicy steps away. Tedra and Rev have a quick conversation about the fact that they've used pretty much all of his college fund. Juicy is going to the University of Phoenix to become an HR person, basically. He wants to just get a job working with people and kind of finish his college degree from the University of Phoenix and move into that role. However, they both Tedra and Rev have used his college fund to both pay for the wedding reception and to remodel the bathroom in a very different way. That became very expensive, and so they had to use almost pretty much all of his college fund to do that. So they reveal that bit of information as Juicy is off. Eventually, Juicy comes back on stage. Tedra breaks the news to him about that, and he and Rev have their confrontation scene. Think the Hamlet and Claudius scene where Claudius basically says, "Buck up, buddy." That's kind of what happens with the Rev and Juicy confrontation. It ends in a sort of faux boxing match that Rev drags Juicy into and ends up punching him enough to knock him down, and they kind of part ways with that at about the time that the rest of the crew that's coming shows up. Rabbi, Larry, and Opal all show up. Rabbi, again, is the kind of stand-in for Polonius, Larry for Laertes, and Opal for Ophelia. And then you have a couple more scenes. So the kind of party gets started, and then one by one, a couple more scenes occur between Juicy and various other characters. It starts with Juicy and Opal, who have this conversation between the two of them. Opal is kind of bucking some of the gender stereotypes that she is being forced into by her mother, Rabbi. She resists the outfit that she's been dressed in for the day, and eventually says, "Hey, I think you're kind of have feelings for me, Juicy, and probably I just need to let you know I don't have feelings for you. Not only that, I'm not even attracted to men, I'm attracted to women." And Juicy says, "Don't worry, I don't have any feelings for you. I'm not really attracted to either right now." And so don't worry about that. They kind of get on the same page with that. The next scene is the meal. Everyone comes out with all the food, and then there's this karaoke scene where everyone is trying to be this big party together, followed by a game scene where charades is played. This is the catch the conscience of the king moment, Juicy puts a specific prompt into the bowl that he then acts out, which is I think the preacher killed the cook or something like that is the phrase or the book that is acted out in charades, which he sees Rev kind of react alarmedly to that, storm off into the house. He gets his confirmation that in fact Rev probably did kill his father, which is followed by a scene between Larry and Juicy, where Larry, who throughout the scenes has been kind of certainly attracted to Juicy from across the scenes. At least the stage directions imply that he is paying close attention to Juicy, often kind of orbiting around him. And they have a scene where Larry admits to some substantial feelings for Juicy. And they kind of walk through that. Juicy kind of asks him why he's been holding this as a secret for such a long time. And Larry admits some of the pressures that he's under. He's in the military. He has the pressures of his mother Rabbi's expectations on him, and so he doesn't want to admit to both his feelings and his orientation or his gender identity to his family. So on we go. Then there's another scene where Tedra comes out of the house. She's been talking with Rev. And she comes out and confronts Juicy. Juicy sees the ghost of Pap again. This is sounding similar to those of you who know Hamlet. Juicy says that surely Rev has killed father or Pap, and you need to confront him about that. Tedra goes back inside, and then all the young ones come out in a great riff scene, which I'm excited to talk about. All the kind of younger kids all come outside, and not kids, they're all late teens or 20s, and they're all outside and all talking to each other about kind of how they would redo what's going on with them. So they reset that a little bit and kind of talk about what they would imagine their world would be like if they moved out of the house, etc., if they had a little bit more power in their world. Then Rev storms out of the house. Rev has been confronted by Tedra to some degree, or at least Tedra has told him that Juicy accused him of the deed, and he goes off on Juicy. They have this confrontation. He somewhat pseudo admits that yes, he in fact did it, but even if he did do it, there's no way for you to prove it. It doesn't really matter. I'm here now. You're not getting rid of me. Blah 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 blah. He goes over and he eats some of the meat that he made and proceeds to start choking on it. Everyone is trying to save him. Pretty much the only one who seems to know the Heimlich maneuver is Juicy. And he tries to go over and save him, but Rev resists being saved by him because of the... he's homophobic is basically what it is. He gestures away. He doesn't want him to help because he says, or he gestures through the stage directions and through his gestures, I don't want his help because he's gay. He dies. He dies having choked on the kind of gristle of the rib that he was eating. There's also a fight between, and I'm a little hazy at the moment on whether this was right before or right after this, but there was a fight between Juicy and Larry because Rabbi comes out and accuses Juicy again of kind of being gender nonconforming and not really conforming to gender stereotypes, and so he ends up actually kind of revealing Larry's conversation with him without Larry's permission. Larry and him get into a fight, and there's this whole scene where Larry ends up kind of being forced to come out at the hands of Juicy, and their confrontation there. Notably, though, in a difference from the source document, the Shakespearean Hamlet, they don't kill each other. The only person who dies is pretty much kind of the only person who dies is Rev, who drops having choked on the rib. Then there's this fourth wall breaking scene where they're all kind of there. We have Rev dead on the floor, and you have the kind of self-aware Juicy of both his relationship with the fourth wall break, looking out to the audience and saying, I think we're supposed to all kill each other now. This is what happens at the end of a Shakespearean play. We're supposed to all kill each other, and they all don't. They all just decide to do something else. They kind of switch to what if we just kind of were together with each other and lived with each other a little bit. Everyone kind of gather around, let's play, let's eat. I think, if I'm remembering correctly, there is a stage direction where eventually Rev jumps up and kind of joins in the eating of the food. And by the end of the play, this kind of unscripted stage direction is that the party continues all the way to the end of the play. A notable riff on the Hamlet of yore.
There's no flights of angels sing thee to thy rest, Hamlet.
Yeah, there's no late arrival of Fortinbras or something like that. It's just it's straight through into this party that kind of goes on for as long as you think you can make the scene last. I think basically the final sort of stage direction is a beautifully evocative line. The lights burn on until we are all gone like stars. So the scene continues is a good way to sum that up until it's done.
Yeah, so I mean, clearly, right, and this is no secret to anybody that this play follows the kind of loosest connections to the Hamlet story until there's this major shift at the end, right? James Ijames has taken this tragedy that ends with violence and death and made it into something else, something like a more traditional comedy where it ends in a party instead of a murder, right? But I actually more interested in starting at the beginning because I do think when you started your synopsis, Jackson, you were talking about if you didn't know this was Hamlet. And I wonder about how a theater would advertise the show. I mean, right now, the off-Broadway run and the Broadway run are certainly leaning into everybody knowing on the front end that this is a Hamlet adaptation. If that were so, if you came in and you knew the play was an adaptation of Hamlet, I am fascinated by how James Ijames has started the play. The first line of the play is, "Are you watching porn?"
Yep.
After you hear these noises from his phone. So they're pretty big shift, right? But then we all know, or a lot of people know, that Hamlet is, the beginning scenes are this ghost encounter. And so the ghost in this play comes on stage and he's wearing a white ghost sheet, like one of the, like a bed sheet with the eyes cut out. I mean, I think James Ijames is riffing at the beginning of the play on our expectations of Hamlet, both our expectations of like the tone of a serious Shakespeare piece, and we start with this line, "Are you watching porn?" And then our understanding of the tone of the play about a ghost who seeks revenge, right? And he comes out in a white bed sheet with the eyes cut out. I mean, that tells you something about the play you're about to watch.
Yeah, and it's followed up like consistently, which is why I think that there's a scant possibility of a world where you could get a little ways into it without really knowing, because the language used is very irreverent. Like it's very and like familial. Irreverent's the wrong word. It's familial. It's comfortable with each other. You have this sort of eventually once Juicy sees the ghost of Pap. Pap basically says, "I wore the sheet because I thought it was going to be scarier if I did." and so you have this sort of like very self-aware, very comfortable dialogue, which you're not necessarily expecting when you go to Hamlet, which is often couched in somewhat archaic old dialogue.
Yeah, or the dialogue certainly is a different kind of form of English, but I also think more than riffing on the actuality of the play, which in interviews I think you can see that James Ijames respects quite a bit. He's riffing on what we expect to encounter because there is this sort of old English dialogue. It's of course gorgeous writing, but I think there's this sort of general expectation of handling it very seriously and the beauty of the poetry and all this, and we get a totally different kind of writing. Not that it's not beautiful or poetic, it absolutely is, but it does not feel like Shakespearean verse until it actually is Shakespearean verse later in the play.
Right. Yeah. Every once in a while, there's these great monologues that come through, either in Shakespearean verse. Also, though, like the sort of homage monologues that break through as well, that aren't in Shakespearean verse. Tio has a great one that I forgot to mention specifically in the synopsis. But when all the young people are out there kind of dreaming of a different world, he basically describes like a trip that he went on when he was playing a VR game. But it's like it's still a well-worded trip, and the way that there's multiple times when people have these not quite soliloquies, I guess, but monologues. Sometimes they're soliloquies.
Well, I do think there's soliloquies. Yeah, the play it kind of riffs on the way that Hamlet and a lot of the Shakespearean tragedies really as a whole function in these characters turning and sort of professing the innerness of their heart to the audience. And some of what that does is sets up the audience to understand the character's motivations. Sometimes it advances the plot. Sometimes it's just incredibly gorgeous sort of psychological writing. And this play plays on that with several times throughout the show. It's especially Juicy does it because, of course, the Hamlet soliloquy are the famous ones are from Hamlet mostly. Juicy will turn to the audience and like the sort of background character or the other characters in the scene rather will become sort of background. They'll sort of fade out volume wise and mute. They still have some sort of action behind them, but it will be quiet. Like one of the very first times this happens is a quote from the script. Pap and Juicy, so Pap the ghost and Juicy are in a conversation about what he wants to do, and Juicy turns to the audience, and the subtext, the stage directions rather are. Pap is sort of muted, but continues to rail. Furious. His fury waxes and wanes over and over behind the following. And then a little later it says it should have moments that feel legitimately sublime and beautiful and moments that feel utterly rabid while Juicy focuses on us.
Yeah. So you have this kind of like passive or not passive scene, this scene happening behind, almost like underscoring what's going on in front. So sometimes it's that, and other times though the characters notice Juicy talking to the audience and
I think almost across the board they do. I'm trying to think. I can't quite come up with every example in the play that this happens.
Yeah,
but it's almost every time at least that the characters notice.
Yeah, and sometimes, like, I'm thinking of a scene, I forget exactly where it is, but it's between Juicy and Tedra, where Tedra comes out and notices that he's talking to the audience and kind of, like, demands that he present her well, and not as this sort of person who just decided to go off and get married again really quickly, but that there were a lot of things going on and that she was trying to kind of handle a lot of things in that moment. So you have Hamlet is a famously the play is famous for the fact that Hamlet has this relationship with the audience. And so it's kind of cool to see other characters get that moment of relationship with the audience in this kind of reimagining of it.
Yeah, Tedra has this great where she's trying to tell Juicy how she wants to be presented. Basically, she's like, everybody, they all think I'm trash or something. It happens in the Bible all the time.
All the time. Yeah.
It's an interesting feature of the script, too, that Juicy is aware of Hamlet the play. he quotes the play, and when characters ask him about what he's quoting, he says he's quoting Shakespeare. It's not like just it's not just a straight up adaption, I guess I'll say. Beyond the way in which the plot shifts at the end, the play knows it's an adaption and thus is a contemporization of Shakespeare, and the character of Juicy plays in it. He seems to be kind of the only one that understands that he is a Hamlet, that he's doing Hamlet things. But it's part of, I don't know, is it about the sort of in joke with the audience, or why would you write this Hamlet with a knowledge of the other Hamlet?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, some of it is kind of the kind of cultural awareness that the audience would have, the inferrals that you can make as a result of being steeped in Hamlet for centuries. So some of that is kind of building upon it. I think it's also, though, I saw one interview with Ijames that he talked about. This is like his conversation with Shakespeare, like how he would imagine sitting down and being able to talk to the guy, is by kind of setting his story, his specific story, because he in many of his interviews, he's like, I grew up in a house very much like this in North Carolina. This in some ways is me kind of bringing my family to the Shakespearean table, and telling my story in the world that Shakespeare created all those years ago. So you have this sort of like conversation aspect going on as well, where a contemporary playwright is bringing his own story, and his own experience to something that has become kind of this not quite archetype, but this almost like this common experience for theater folk, people who are accustomed to going to theater, and giving it a little bit of a change, giving it a change of a lot of gender identity awareness, and the ability for people to find something in this play, to kind of have the courage to express themselves fully, because there's a lot of that in this play between either Juicy or Larry or Opal. So you have him bringing this whole other conversation to the table that Shakespeare maybe didn't necessarily write into it, but that the world of Hamlet is able to morph to represent well.
Mm-hmm. And there's some incredible ways in which the play crosses over. I was having a conversation with someone in my life. I think I know who it is, but I can't promise that I'm right, so I'm not going to say a name. If you're listening and this was you, I apologize for not mentioning that you were the one who said this, but I just want to make sure I'm right. This person was talking about Shakespeare, and talked about how in some ways it really is the language that is the barrier right now, that the plots of Shakespeare plays are really solid, that the actual story of what happens really still holds up, but there is a language barrier. And I think in some ways you see that in Fat Ham. He's sort of taken some of the really sharp story moments and used them and sort of showed us how effective they really are. I'm thinking of the charades scene, in just how good that scene still is. It still holds up.
Yeah.
He sets up that they're about to play charades, and then he has Juicy step forward, and Juicy gives us the plays the thing monologue. I mean, just straight out of the book, as far as I can tell. I didn't compare it line for line, but it seems to be just straight from Hamlet, the plays the thing monologue, right? I've heard that guilty creatures sitting at a play have, by the very cunning of the scene, been struck so to the soul that presently they have proclaimed their malfectations. The play's the thing wherein I'll catch the conscience of the king. And then he makes a little joke. Actually, it's the cook. I mean the cook. And so we know on the front end what he's going to set out to do, just like we do in Hamlet. We know on the front end that this fake play that the players put on in Hamlet is designed to prompt the guilty party to react guiltily. And we get that in this play too. It's in charades rather than a false play. But it's amazing how effective that storytelling, that plot moment really is.
Yeah, it still definitely still functions, definitely still like generates a mostly innocent way for Juicy or Hamlet to kind of accuse Rev of having killed the father without necessarily pointing the finger back at himself as to the person who accused him of it. It's a great plot device, and also the way that it's kind of presented as like a family game night or a game moment is again recontextualizing it into something else, because if you think about like that moment in the play, you have to go through, or in Shakespeare's play, you have to go through so many steps to get there, right? Like players have to come to the theater and Hamlet has to talk to the players and he has to like script the whole thing. There's that whole scene where he's talking about how to act well, versus
but it is like it's supposed to be. I mean, this is one of those things where the culture kind of gets in the way, because them having this play in the original Hamlet is not the same as us going to see a play today, where it's like sort of a special night out. They're the royal family. They have players come through to do an evening entertainment for them all the time. It's much more like us watching a TV show at night. I mean, it's just
playing a game.
The evening's entertainment or playing a game, right? So changing it to the game, it does fit our understanding of what the moment is supposed to be. It's not a big special event. It's an evening's entertainment for this family.
Yeah, exactly. So that's sort of like reframe into something that would just kind of passively be engaged with as something that we do together, and then surprise, it's the gotcha moment is yeah, it's just brilliant. It's really good. And also the other piece that I like, the kind of reframe that I enjoyed was how sandwiched everything is into like the sort of visceral, everything is happening, there's no scene breaks, it's all sort of happening at once, all in one moment too, like all at one party, all in one attention span, also for kind of our shorter attention span audiences. It's all happening so presently and viscerally. That sort of reframe of sandwiching a couple of those scenes together and bringing the action to a compelling beat was also really exciting to get to kind of read and be a part of.
Yeah, it's an interesting balance. I'm actually amazed how effectively he manages to achieve sort of two things. One of them is what you're describing, that, you know, in Hamlet, the span of time over which that play takes place is a long time. Yeah. And Hamlet spends a lot of that play sort of waxing poetic about the philosophy of his situation and pondering the reality of what's going on. He's sort of he's the philosopher prince, right? He just spends a lot of time thinking and pondering what to do. And that occupies a lot of time in Hamlet. And so in this play, James Ijames manages to both shrink the amount of time to be like, I mean, literally just like 2 hours of time. I don't think we skip any time in this play. I think it's pretty much straight up the 2 hours that you see. So he takes all of that time between Hamlet seeing the ghost and choosing his action, shrinks it down to 2 hours, but still keeps around this feature of who Hamlet is. Juicy is this sort of ponderer, this sort of poet at heart who just has all of these questions and needs to think things through and break them down and explore them. And all the other characters in Fat Ham definitely say that about him.
Yeah, and you see that in the way that he interacts with other people all the time too. With the maybe with the exception of Rev, but even with Rev, he kind of adopts this posture of like kind of continually questioning and willing to say things that he probably knows will get him in some sort of trouble, but he'll still stick to them. And kind of present himself well in that way, and also suffer the consequences of sticking to representing himself well. So you kind of, I agree. You still get the sort of ponderer, curious person who's willing to engage with each other or with other people, and you get the interesting riff of, I think the Opal and Juicy relationship is a compelling riff on the Ophelia and Hamlet one, because Hamlet is, pretty brutal to Ophelia throughout the play. And it seems like that Opal and Juicy's interaction is very, very different from that. You kind of get more of a brutal relationship between Larry and Juicy than you do between Juicy and Opal.
Right, which I think makes sense. The brutality of what Hamlet does to Ophelia in Hamlet is echoed in the brutality of what Juicy does to Larry, who's the lady standing. And Juicy is gay. So, of course, there's this sort of switch in the characters of the play where he's not attracted to Ophelia or the woman character or one of the women character in the show. He's attracted to the male character. And so you switch some of the action of those characters around and you end up with Juicy treating Larry in much the same brutal way that Hamlet treats Ophelia. In this case, he outs him to his mother, which is really a painful scene and causes quite a bit of harm for Larry in the moment. And so you still get that kind of questioning that Hamlet's not this sort of perfect hero in the play. Of course, it's Shakespeare. He didn't write perfect heroes. And so you get a hero who does something across the course of the play that you really are taken aback by the brutality of.
Yeah. And then there's still the offense to the Larity's family. It's just centered on Larry instead of on Opal. And interestingly, Opal doesn't necessarily step into the kind of Opal serves as this great kind of egger on from the sidelines. No matter what chaos is going on, Opal is like, all right, I'm here for this. Let's go. There's a great scene where they're trying to decide whether or not to actually kill everyone at the end of the play. And Juicy's like, okay, everyone get something to kill each other with. And everyone grabs plastic fork, handbag, a piece of meat from like a rib from the plate. But Opal is like ready to go. So something about her posture is like, okay, I'm just backing you up.
I will
you said
actually
we need to
kill everybody here.
Yeah.
There's a great early in the play when Juicy and Opal like meet for the first time, and Juicy's like, I think I'm gonna kill someone. Or I think I might kill someone. I'm not sure what to do. Opal's response, without any context, without any hesitation, is just like, do it. You should do it.
You should
kill
do
him. I don't know who you're talking about, but kill him.
Yep.
But to see the flip side of that, let's maybe in our final moments here talk about one of the kind of core shifts from the Hamlet play that Fat Ham has, beyond all the sort of cultural relevancy of changing it to a black family in the South and all that. One of the major changes is the way the play ends. This is not the painful tragedy that Hamlet is. There's no duel with a poisoned sword at the end. There's no Ophelia wandering off to madness. There is this great party, and Larry comes back, dressed in the fullest expression of their sort of inner person, and they have this joyous celebration.
Yeah, and yeah, the meal is shared between them all, and yeah, there's the joyous celebration kind of going on and on and on, and the sort of the joy of that and the acceptance of that, the hospitality of that. Very different from Ye Olde Hamlet, where like at least 5 people are dead, and everyone is kind of remarking on the death and the tragedy of it. And yeah, it's a substantial riff on that. And I think that's part of the sort of the not critique, but again the conversation, I think, of Ijames as he's talking with Shakespeare about this play is, what if we didn't spend as much time in this kind of angst space? What if we instead spent a little bit more time both in our art and in our family situations, just sharing meals together, sharing each other's stories, allowing people to show up in their full expression of themselves? And what would that world look like if that occupied our kind of entertainment sphere and our family sphere?
And also, I think more specifically, what if violence was not the justifiable response to violence? Like, what if the core goodness of this world was not achieved by somebody doing violence to someone else because that person did violence to someone else, because that person did violence to someone else, because that, like, what if this cycle, James Ijames in an interview says, at its core, this play is about how this Hamlet character, whose name is Juicy, is meeting and undermining his family's cycles of trauma and violence.
Yeah. And that is certainly derailed a kind of most stages of it. Like even the way Rev ends up dying is not at the hands of Juicy. Juicy has been wrestling with that ever since Pap showed up in the first scene, telling him to go and kill Rev. He's wrestling with it. It's you're wondering whether he'll do it or not, but he doesn't. It's Rev who ends up eating his own.
In fact, he tries to save him.
Yeah, he goes to try to save him. He's subverting that narrative consistently through the play.
And there's a great early in the play, not early, but earlier in the play, in the conversation between Larry and Juicy, where Larry comes out and they have this almost romantic, intimate moment. Larry says something to the, Juicy's talking about how he might have to kill somebody, and Larry says something to the effect of, I actually think you're the type of person that might save someone. That's really the kind of human you are. I kind of wish I was more like you. And you see that little foreshadowing echoed at the end of the play. Rather than, cutting Claudius with a sword and then forcing him to drink this poison, Juicy legitimately tries to save Rev as he's choking to death. And it's Rev's, he chokes to death on his own barbecue and his own homophobia. And that's the sort of justifiable world. There's still this moment of death. It's not a moment of intentional violence. And then the whole thing shifts from that point forward. Very early in the play, Tio, who's the Horatio stand-in, he and Juicy are talking. And this is what Tio says. These cycles of violence are deep, ingrained, hell, engineered, hard to come out of. Like your pop went to jail, his pop went to jail, his pop went to jail, his pop went to jail. And what's before that, huh? Slavery. It's inherited trauma. You're carrying around your whole family's trauma, man. And that's okay. You okay, but you don't gotta let it define you.
Yeah, that certainly pays off. It slipped in early. It slipped in earlier. And has that kind of like you're still trying to figure out the play sort of moment of that script, but it definitely that is then paid off throughout the entirety of it, all the way to the end. Beautiful end of the play. Beautiful play. So many great things that we could zero in on, talk about different sorts of character tropes that are brought in, great ways that it all interacts with the kind of the world building, if you will, of Shakespeare's Hamlet. Alas, we are down to the end of our time for this podcast, but the good news is we don't have to stop talking about this play. We'd love to keep chatting about it with all of you out there in podcast land. You can find us on all the sites. Some of the sites. We're on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter at the username at NoScriptPodcast. We also have a Gmail, noscriptpodcast@gmail.com, because we're ancient. You can find us on any of those sites, and we would love to keep talking about Fat Ham with all of you.
Absolutely. If you've liked this episode or any of now we're into season 10 of this show, all of those previous 9 seasons are online as well. If you've enjoyed No Script, if you're a part of this community, just tell your family and friends about it. They can find us on Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, and YouTube, as well as other places that podcasts can be found. You can also like us on Facebook, and a link every Monday appears on that Facebook page to the new episode, so it's easy to click and play from there. Hey, we're excited to be back here at the start of another great season, season 10. Here we go. Until next week, I'm Jacob Mann Christensen.
And I am Jackson Nikolai. Thank you for listening to No Script, the podcast.